For long years, peace prevailed across Tamriel. Necromancy and Daedra worship were abolished, trade flourished, and through the careful ministrations of Riemann II and his councillors, the Second Empire thrived. And yet, the great emperor desired... more. He turned his eyes to the provinces of Blackmarsh and Morrowind, the unconquered territory weighing heavy on him. In the 2830s, he called forth the legions in an imprudent attempt to conquer Blackmarsh. The losses to the swamp itself, its diseases and deadly beasts, nearly matched the number lost in combat with the Argonians. But the Empire managed to establish footholds in the northern and eastern marches by 2837. Riemann declared Blackmarsh to be officially annexed. Citizens of great empires who are fond of keeping their heads firmly attached to their shoulders tend not to question the declarations of emperors. A more skeptical-minded chronicler may question just how the illustrious Second Empire, under the mighty military leader Riemann II, went from recording heavy losses in the swamps to proudly announcing total victory. These hypothetical skeptics may well say this was the Empire's attempt to save face, to inspire loyalty to the crown, and assert to foreign powers that Riemann II was not a man to be opposed. Perhaps that is why well-trusted sources like the Pocket Guide to the Empire describe lands like Blackmarsh as follows. Some regions escape provincial classification due to the primitive civilization of their beastfolk inhabitants. Collectively, these beastfolk states are known as the Wild Regions, which may or not be of interest to the Emperor. They are included only for the most intrepid of travellers, and to throw the achievements of civilization into more brilliant relief by contrast with these benighted corners of Tamriel. This is a rather convoluted way of saying, oh, if the glorious empire is not currently controlling these wild provinces, then the sole reason is because we don't want to waste our time on such undesirable, untamable land. And the reason is absolutely not that we failed miserably in conquering it. Contrary to the impression I've given so far, I'm not here to criticise the Empire, but rather I'm here to point out the unreliability of imperial accounts that insincerely claim that the Empire conquered every corner of Tamriel. It's a romantic declaration to make, and you can see why imperial sources would attest to it. But in reality, there is a province in Tamriel that no non-native power has ever been able to conquer. Treaties have been signed, fragile truces made, but in terms of actual annexation of land, it has never been done. Hey guys, it's Drew here and welcome back to Fudge Muppet. In today's video we're heading to Blackmarsh, to the home of the Argonians, and we're going to learn about the various attempts by foreign powers to conquer this impregnable province. The Pocket Guide may call it the garbage heap of Tamriel, to where everything rotten and despoiled eventually flows. But it also concedes that its heart is inviolate, for so poisonous is its air, ground and water, its mysteries remain secure. It may be a fetid, noxious place, but it has consistently attracted the attention of power-hungry mortals. The question is, did these powerful people bite off more than they could chew? To answer that question, let's look at each iteration of the Cyrodiilic Empire in chronological order, starting with the Elysian Empire. For quite some time, Blackmarsh hadn't received a great deal of attention from the Empire. It was after all a backwater, where the native beasts kept largely to themselves, and no civilized human would ever wish to inhabit. But the undesirable traits of Argonia had their advantages too. When the Elysian Rebellion began, and the elves were systematically expelled from Cyrod, the Barsebic Aelids of the east migrated even further east into the marsh. The terrain wasn't so pleasant, and these refugees would have certainly missed their glorious heartland citadels. But life in a swamp was better than execution on the steppes of your once great civilization. The humans could have pursued these Aelids, but likely saw it as a costly endeavour, and there was no denying that Aelid society was doomed. So these Aelids survived, and established new colonies in cities that would become known as Stormhold and Gideon in the modern day. These Aelids seemingly died off without Elysian intervention, but they set a precedent for enemies of the Empire. There would always be a safe haven from the wrath of the Imperials if one needed it. Around 8 centuries later, a legendary brigand took advantage of this. Red Brahmin, the Argonian pirate with a luscious mane of scarlet hair, made himself a fortune by stealing from the Elysian Empire. His sails were a common sight in the Topal Bay and along the Niben River. Red Brahmin and his crew could afford to be bold, for whenever the Empire sent ships to apprehend them, they simply sailed out of the bay, skirted around Blackmarsh's western shores, and vanished into the confined waterways leading through to present-day Solrest and Blackrose. In Blackmarsh, the swamps are connected by a labyrinthine network of narrow, precarious channels. Being able to discern a navigable waterway from a shallow death trap was perhaps Red Brahmin's most valuable skill. The Imperial fleet simply could not chase him into these waters without severe losses. Somewhere along the edge of Topal Bay, shrouded from view by dense mangrove forests and stagnant sediment-ridden water, Brahmin knew of a winding river that drove deep into the heart of the marsh. Suffice it to say that Red Brahmin and his crew gave Argonians a terrible reputation in Cyrodiil's south. Eventually, Empress Hestra had had enough and demanded that the Imperial Navy bring her Brahmin's head. They succeeded in pursuing Brahmin back to his brigand kingdom deep in Argonia, but their efforts to settle the lands along those waterways were in vain. The Empire was able to document their first reliable accounts of the true culture of Blackmarsh, but that's the best thing to come from this ordeal. As the Cyrodiils pushed deeper into their land, trying to settle it along the pirate routes, they encountered stronger and more violent resistance with each incursion. Once the pirate menace was dealt with, the First Empire was generally content to leave Blackmarsh to its native inhabitants. And so, that brings us to the Second Empire and their attempt to bring Blackmarsh into civilized society. 1800 years had passed since Hestra's half-baked effort, but how would the
Enemy drop their flag. Good work. Winning is good for business.